thing right from the start, and you got everybody marching to your beat, including me, and I'm through buying it.
What are you doing? Come on, this ain't no bank robbery.
Inside Man.
The Day Wall Street Exploded, America in Its First Age of Terror, has just been published by the Oxford University Press, and it's received rave reviews. Welcome.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Beverly, why don't you describe the incident that's the subject of your book?
Sure. On September 16th, 1920, a horse-drawn cart pulled up alongside the Morgan Bank on Wall Street, and at 12:01, as people were beginning to leave their offices for lunch, it exploded into the lunchtime crowd. It blew out windows throughout the financial district. It was really a pretty massive explosion, shut down the financial markets for the day, and it killed 38 people, and wounded several hundred, and that made it, in its moment, the worst terrorist attack in American history.
What made you want to write about it?
Well, I initially came across it, and I think the thing that motivated me is what I hope will motivate a lot of people to pick up the book, which is just the fact that I had never heard of it. I was a graduate student at Columbia at the time, and I was reading through a textbook, and it had a one-sentence mention of this event. And there were a lot of events in American history that I had never heard of, but this was so striking, and it seemed to me like it might be a window into a world that seemed very different from the one that we were living in.
This is the site of the very first terrorist attack on New York City. The date was September 16, 1920. A horse-drawn cart had pulled up to this spot at around noon, and the driver gets off the cart and goes scurrying off into the crowd, never to be seen or heard from again. What nobody knew at the time was that there was 100 pounds of dynamite and 500 pounds of small lead weights on this cart. And at 12:01 p.m., the fireball went 100 feet into the air. Shrapnel went everywhere.
You know, in this attack on Wall Street, this explosion, they never found out who did it. They blamed it on Italian anarchists and communist elements at the time because it was an attack on capitalism itself. You can see the evidence on the wall here. This is the actual evidence from 1920. This is limestone marble, so you can imagine if it did this to this wall, what it did to the 38 people that died here that day and over 400 that were in.
The names, of some of the terrorists and educators. Some of them are very, very well known. Alexander Berkman, who tried to murder Henry Clay Frick down at the Carnegie plant in Pennsylvania. Emma Goldman, Sacco and Vanzetti, who have become sort of really martyrs to their cause. We tend to over-romanticize these people.
Well, I think there is a tendency of sorts to over-romanticize. I mean, Sacco and Vanzetti in particular, though there have been several historians who have pointed out the ways in which kind of the public image of Sacco and Vanzetti as martyrs doesn't always entirely fit the reality of what happened. But one of the things that I really tried to do in the book was to look at figures like Emma Goldman, Alexander Berkman, Sacco and Vanzetti, Big Bill Haywood, the leader of the IWW during this period, and to really talk pretty frankly about about what their ideas about violence and terrorism in particular were. Sacco and Vanzetti are probably the most dramatic example because they really were members of a group of Italian anarchists in the United States, mainly in Massachusetts, but in New York and other areas as well, who were actually quite openly committed to the use of certain kinds of terrorism, assassinations and bombings as part of their kind of political program, part of their political campaign.
And while Sacco and Vanzetti may not have robbed the paymaster, you know, in Massachusetts, in Braintree, for which they were executed, they were involved in some nasty stuff, at least supporting it, right?
Right. So this circle of anarchists that they were members of were followers of a man named Luigi Galleani, who have been, since coming to the United States in the early 20th century and even earlier, have been a very open advocate of terrorism. And this group of anarchists around him firmly believed that terrorism was a way to strike a blow against an unjust capitalist system, against a tyrannical state. And they had engaged in various bombing campaigns prior to the Wall Street bombing and certainly prior to the big Sacco and Vanzetti case of the early 1920s. The case for which they were actually tried and martyred, some people would say, was actually fairly apolitical crime. It was the murder and robbery of a couple of payroll guards in Massachusetts. So it wasn't, that aspect of their lives didn't come out as fully in the trial or in the memory, perhaps as a result of that fact.